Today, I want to go over the top 5 things I think people misunderstand the most about astrology and their birth charts. I've been doing professional astrology for over 6 years, and I see so many people get so confused and overwhelmed with everything that their birth chart can tell them, and they oftentimes get misguided about what things mean what or just misunderstanding something. So today, I want to go over the top 5 things I think people misunderstand the most, clear them up for you, and make sure you stick around to the end because I think this question at the end is the most important one, or at least what most people are looking to understand about their birth chart. Number 1, their sun sign. This is oftentimes what everybody knows about their birth chart. They may never have even heard of their birth chart before. They don't know their moon sign. They don't know anything about astrology, but they know their sun sign. And so they place so much importance on their sun sign. And that's not to say that the sun sign isn't important in some degree. However, it varies in its importance. Number 1, there is a difference between day and night charts. If you are born at night, then we're not going to be looking at your sun sign all the way, right? Think of it in an ancient perspective. In the ancient mindset, the sun was in the underworld when it was nighttime, right? So why would we look at your sun sign for any information? If you were born at nighttime, the moon, which would have been what we call your luminary of sect, would have been the thing that would have supposedly been shining light at the time that you were born, if there was anything shining light at the time that you were born. And the whole concept of what planets or what things are illuminated and when and where is really critical in the school of thought of astrology. But your sun sign is a little bit more important if you were born in the day, because lo and behold, the sun is shining. The sun is what is causing all of the light to be around, and planets reflect the light of the sun. You know, when you go outside and you look at the nighttime and you look at the planets, they're not putting off light, they're just reflecting the sun's light. So if you're born in the day, the sun is going to be more important in your birth chart. And the way that you differentiate that is you look at your ascendant and you look at your descendant. And if the sun is above the ascendant and at the top part of the chart, then you're born in the day. And if it's below, you're born at night. And so the sun sign in your chart may not represent you exactly. Now, the sun sign is going to represent your will, your identity, your ego, but not necessarily you. Now, I made a TikTok about this thing. So many people are reading or watching the wrong horoscope, or they're just watching it from their sun sign, and the sun isn't what represents you in the chart. It's actually the rising sign. It's the ascendant that represents you. And this is because the ascendant was looked at in ancient astrology as this is where the sun rose. This is where the day began. So it was symbolic of where life began, and it's where the heavens meet the earth. So it was symbolic of where the body meets the soul. As well, back in ancient times, they didn't really have clocks back then. They used sundials. However, another way that they told time was by figuring out what zodiac sign was rising over the eastern horizon. And this is why the ascendant in the first house and all of the planets that are there are more representative of you than anything else in the chart. Number 2, that their whole chart has everything to do about them. Now, I had a really good conversation with a good friend of mine, Jen Zart. She's a professional astrologer. She's absolutely incredible. And she laid this down really clearly in my podcast called The Delineation.
Let's start with like how they look at the chart, right?
Okay.
So in the modern way that we look at a chart, we see that as the map of the soul. And so we're here looking at your Mars is your drive, and your Venus is how you connect, and the moon is your body and maybe your mind, and Mercury is also a different kind of your mind and how you communicate. But when a traditional astrologer looks at the chart, they see the ruling planet of your ascendant is you. And everything else in the chart is the life world you were born into. Did the world begin when you were born?
No, well, I'm a Leo. So.
I mean, you're okay. So yes, okay.
But no.
I didn't exist until Cam was born, okay? No, but the thing is, we were born into a life that precedes us, right? And so from the traditional perspective of interpretation, we can account for that. And we can actually see that, oh, you know what? This transit isn't going to be having an effect on me. It's affecting something in my life world, right? It's not necessarily happening to me. It's in my field. Right.
And what we're talking about here is the difference between whole sign houses and quadrant house systems. So that could be Placidus, Regiomontanus, Periphery, whatever it is. And if you sound confused about this already, if you go to astro.com and plug in your birth data, typically a Placidus chart is what's going to pull up. Now, the houses in astrology are just a division of the sky. They're not a division of the zodiac, but they're just a division of where things were at in the sky. Now, houses and what house system is the best or the most accurate has been debated for thousands of years in astrology, and you're going to get a completely different answer from every astrologer. However, most astrologers agree that there is quite a bit of difference between whole sign houses and quadrant houses. So again, anything that's Placidus, Regiomontanus, any of those. And whole sign houses seem to be a much more objective view of someone's life, while Quadrant houses, so let's just say Placidus, when you pull up your birth chart, can be a much more subjective feeling or much more subjective experience of your life. Now, modern astrology and psychological astrology has really promoted this idea that everything in your chart has everything to do with you, like just what Jen said. Mars is your drive and Venus is what you connect to, right? And there is a way to read your chart that way. However, not everything in your life is about you. And if you want to get more of a better description of how you are playing a role in your life and how outside forces are playing roles in your life, this is what whole sign houses is used for. So a planet in your chart may not necessarily have anything to do with you. A planet in your chart might represent much more of your friendships and the kind of friends that you make. A planet in your chart might be more descriptive of your bosses and the authority figures in your life. A planet in your chart might be more descriptive of your pets in your life and not so much you. And so while there is a way to look at your birth chart to where it's all about you and everything's about your own personal experience, that's not the only way. And personally, I find it much more constructive to look at a birth chart through whole sign houses in a much more objective view, so I can get an understanding of what's going on in my life force and kind of take myself out of it. Number 3, aspects. I see so many intelligent people understand their zodiac signs and their planets, but for some reason they get confused about the aspects. And I don't know if that's because, they didn't do well in geometry in school or what that is, but let me make it very clear. The aspects in a chart just show the relationship between one planet and the other. Now, of course, this is symbolized through a geometrical measurement between the two planets. So the zodiac lies on a 360-degree circle. And depending on where each one of those planets are, they are a certain degree away from one another. Now, all this does is show the relationship between one planet. If you have two planets conjoining each other where they're pretty much on top of each other, this is what we call a conjunction. They pretty much work together, but sometimes they work at odds. And this is really dependent, of course, with all of aspects, it's very dependent on what planet it is and what zodiac sign it is. But conjunctions essentially are when two planets are together and they're either working together for the better or working together for the worse. And then you have the sextile. The way I like to describe the sextile is, for one, it's a 60-degree separation between two planets. And it's kind of like an underhand help. Like if, for example, you're seeing an old lady go up the stairs, you kind of give her an underhand little help to where she can kind of assist herself. It's not like you're doing all of this work to get this, woman up the stairs, but you are assisting in a light way. A sextile is a very easy, very harmonious aspect, but it's not the most significant. Then we get to 90 degrees, and that is what we call the square. Now, squares, 90 degrees, of course, it makes a hard angle. Now, the way I like to describe squares are they're planets working at odds with one another. They're not necessarily against each other, but one planet might have a way of doing things and another planet has another way of doing things, and they go against each other. The best example I can think of is Leo and Scorpio. Leo and Scorpio are a part of the fixed signs, which include Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Taurus. Now, the fixed signs are fixed. They're very rigid. They don't bend. And so these squares go at odds with one another. So one planet might be wanting to do one thing in another way, but another planet wants to do things in another way. And there has to be some kind of, working with one another. And sometimes squares can be good. For example, if you are a leader at some place, you don't want a bunch of yes men around you. You don't want everyone saying yes to everything that you have around you. You want someone to criticize things or ideas that you have to help you be more creative, to help you look for better solutions. And that's what a square really represents. Now, it can be tough at times because both parties aren't always going to agree, but I believe a square can be very beneficial. And then we get the trine aspect. This is a 120 degrees aspect. And of course, if you get three planets all on 120 degrees from each other, that makes a triangle, 360 degrees. And the trine aspect is much more of an overhand reach. The sextile, which is the harmonious aspect, is like an underhand. It's a little bit of an assistance, but the trine is much more of an overhand reach, where if you are on the side of a cliff and I'm trying to help you up, I'm going to reach my hand over and I'm going to grab and I'm going to lift you up. And that's what the trines do. The trines are the most harmonious aspects that you can get. They're all working with one another. They're all on the same team. And then, of course, you get the opposition. This is 180 degrees where planets are exactly opposite each other. This one's really easy to understand. That means the planets are literally at odds with one another. One wants to go here, another one wants to go opposite, and there's this conflict that kind of is created between that aspect. Number 4, transits. For some reason, I think people get a little bit too lost in everything that there is about transits. And now there is a much more systematic, traditional way of looking at transits. And that, of course, is like, looking at annual perfections, looking at time lords, talking about the natal promise. And those are all videos videos that I'll be making very soon if that kind of just went over your head. But not every transit is the same. For one, with transiting planets, so that means whatever planets are doing today and how they're related to your chart, that's what we're really looking at with transits. And the big things you really want to look for are like conjunctions, like when a planet is transiting a part of the sky that you have a natal placement at. That's typically going to represent something major. Now, if you have a asteroid making a quincunx to another asteroid in your chart, that's very subtle. That's not the biggest energy inducer. But transits are going to be telling stories, right? We are all a part of a narrative. We are all a part of a story, which is life essentially. And your birth chart is what your story is, and the transits are telling that story as it continues along. So for example, let's say you have your sun in Taurus and Saturn is transiting Taurus and conjoining your sun. Well, what does that mean? The sun is about your identity and your will, and Saturn is about maturity and authority and discipline. So there might be this time where you feel like you have to discipline yourself more, or you're feeling a little bit more serious and mature. Or you could feel a little bit more weighted down by authorities and your responsibilities. Same thing, let's say the moon, transiting moon is conjoining your Venus. The moon is all about your emotions, your body, feeling good, and Venus is all about sensations and indulgence and enjoyment and love and art and music. And so when the moon conjoins your Venus, there can be this very fun, pleasurable feeling that goes about the day. But that's, of course, dependent on the zodiac sign. You know, let's say you have your Venus in Scorpio and the moon's in Scorpio conjoining your Venus. This might feel kind of good in one sense, but Venus is in detriment in Scorpio, so Venus doesn't like being there. And the moon is fallen in Scorpio, which means they both have these difficulties here. And this is kind of like how people really enjoy like being sad, or really enjoy, you know, going without pleasure. They really enjoy pain, or they really enjoy, you know, things that aren't necessarily stereotypically looked at as good. But not every transit's going to be as super significant, right? In order from least significance to the most significance, I would pretty much do it in the order of the zodiac, right? So the moon is the least significant transit, the sun after that, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Those are going to be the most significant, again, from least significant to most significant transits. So just because the moon is conjoining your midheaven, or the moon is conjoining your Mercury, that's not always the biggest deal. However, Jupiter or Saturn conjoining one of these placements is much more of a bigger deal. And 5, this is the one that I get the most out of all my consultations, out of everyone I talk to on YouTube. They're always asking, what is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning in my birth chart? What is my purpose in life? And this is a very tough question, because there is a side of astrology that can answer those questions in a sense, but my personal belief is, and people aren't always going to agree on this, that it's not always an astrologer's job to tell you what your purpose or the meaning in your life is. Meaning is what you make of it. And the analogy that I've been working with as of late is that life is a card game. You're given the cards that you're dealt, and it's up to you how you play them. Astrology allows us to see what cards we are being dealt with, rather than having to go through life trying to understand ourselves and trying to look at everything that we can and get this weird, nuanced, unclear picture of what the cards that we have are. Astrology makes it very clear of what our cards are, but it's about how you play them. And for some people that aren't really good at poker, they can have a really good hand and they could put some money down, but they don't know what they're doing, so they'll fold and they'll lose money. Or you can have someone that's a little bit crafty that knows how to play poker, and they can have a really terrible hand and they can make a bluff, and no one, you know, everyone believes them until people fall out, and then all of a sudden they win all this money off of a terrible hand. So when you're trying to find meaning and purpose in your birth chart, I think a lot of that is up to you as well. Now, astrology does have a lot of arguments for fate being involved in life, and I am a big believer in fate. However, I'm also a believer in free will, and these are both synonymous with one another. And I've talked about this on my Delineation podcast. I believe it was episode like 6 or 7 on finding your meaning in your birth chart. And I went really deep on this subject, but I believe purpose is a two-way street. One, I don't believe purpose is solely up to you. Now, you might have, like, let's say you're living your purpose, right? Or you're living your truth. Someone might have an idea or a story of what your purpose was in this lifetime, versus someone else that has a completely different experience of you could also have a different idea of what your purpose was according to their life. So I don't believe it's always up to you to understand what your purpose is. But I think in order to understand your purpose, you have to be living your truth. And I know that's something that gets said a lot, and I don't think people really understand what that means. But what your truth is when it comes to your meaning and your purpose is your heart's desire. What is your heart of hearts telling you to do? What visions and dreams were you given as a child and that you grew into that only you know, that only you've wanted to pursue? That is what your purpose is. You're supposed to be listening to your heart's calling. Now, fortunately, astrology can symbolize that in many different ways. And it's up to you to put the pieces together as to what your meaning and purpose is on your own, on what your heart is telling you to do, on what your dreams are telling you to do, on what your vision is for your life, and being able to look at your birth chart as a map and a guideline to fulfilling that purpose. And so many people have completely different purposes in this life. So many people think that, oh, a job or a career is their purpose. And that's such a very Western 21st century way of looking at your birth chart. And that's not what it always was for thousands of years. And so if you're wanting to look for meaning and purpose in your birth chart, that comes from you. You can get the same people that can look around at life, and you can get people that are like atheists and look around at all of the beauty of nature and they think it's devoid of purpose. They think it's devoid of meaning. And then you can get, Buddhist people, Christians, Muslims, whoever it is, and they can look at the world and see that it's full of meaning and purpose. And so a lot of that is on you in order to understand what is around you. And are you looking for meaning? Are you looking for purpose? Or are you only looking for where meaning and purpose is not in your life? And again, this is so important. What you think is what you believe. What you think is what you attract. So if you think there is no purpose in life, then guess what? You're not going to have a purpose in your life. However, if you think that there is purpose in life, if you think that you do have a purpose, you're going to find that. And where I believe astrology comes in with this is being able to give yourself a roadmap of what your options are, right? If you are someone that absolutely loves to cook, food has always been your passion, but you feel like you can't pay your bills, or you feel like there's something about it that, that you're resisting or that you don't want to go into, and you go to a 9-to-5 job, well, you're probably going to be miserable there. And your birth chart can show you, it's like, hey, if you want to have this certain ideal, whether it's, being a professional chef or, being an athlete of some sort or whatever that is, your birth chart's going to show you the circumstances and options you have to fulfill that purpose. And some people have this extraordinarily high expectation of living up to their exact vision. And a part of, again, this is all kind of law of attraction stuff. I don't always subscribe to everything that the law of attraction says, but a big part of this is when you are going after your vision or going after your goal in life, or if you are trying to attract something towards you, you have to realize when you have manifested it. Because if it's not always going to look exactly the way that you had in your head. It could look completely different, but you have to recognize when you are getting that. And so again, other astrologers are going to have completely different opinions on this. I'm just sharing with you what my opinions are on this subject after doing thousands of readings for over 6 years and hundreds of YouTube videos on this subject. So if you disagree with anything that I said, I want to know what your opinions are in the comments below. Make sure you like this video if you got something out of it, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.